Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's CRPOA Off the Record podcast interview featuring retired Deputy DA Ray Mendoza, a distinguished figure in the prosecuting community as well as the legal analysis professionals. I'm Dom Gamboa, your host and the current president of CRPOA. We are thrilled to have Ray with us today, along with my co-host, CRPOA Director Jeff Knockett. A special welcome to all the CRPOA members joining us online today, as much as the enthusiasts who just love to jump in and join our conversations. We look forward to a meaningful discussion diving into Ray's experiences and his perspectives that he brings to the conversation. Ray, thank you for being here, and to all our online participants, let's begin this insightful dialogue. Ray, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you're at in your career?
Sure. I was one of six kids growing up, and my parents got us all off to college, which was a miracle. I graduated Cal Berkeley in 1983, went straight to law school, went to Hastings College of the Law, graduated in 1986, fortunately passed the bar the first time. And during my law school career, I interned with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Civil and Criminal Division. And then when I matriculated out of law school, I got hired by the District Attorney's Office in Santa Clara County. Typically, back then, you were assigned to misdemeanors. I did 36 misdemeanors in a year. I then went to the narcotics unit and then the sexual assault unit, and spent on and off doing sexual assault cases for almost 13 years. I did special ops, homicide. I did juvenile gangs, did every major assignment in the office. I did leave the DA's office for a period of about a year, and I went to go to work with a firm, Cachette and Elston and Morgan Ruby. We were doing the technical equities case, which was a huge security fraud case, wherein people were defrauded of millions of dollars. We ended up recovering about $220 million in 1990 money.
Wow.
So that was a lot of money back then. In fact, some of the investors actually made money after the recoveries. And so worked on that, decided I really liked doing the trial work in criminal law. So I came back to the DA's office, stayed there until 2015 when I retired. And then I went to work with a couple different law firms. One of the law firms was a plaintiff's attorney's law firm specializing in prosecution of sexual assault cases on the civil side. So a lot of teacher, minister cases across the country. One of the big cases I had was a case of USA Olympic swimming, where we represented swimmers who'd been molested by their coaches. That case went to the country. It went nationally. I was on Dateline, 24 Hours, ESPN, and other national networks on that case. I've also, during my career as a chief trial deputy, I supervised officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths, extraditions, subpoenas, special ops. I don't know if I said homicide, and anything that came down the pipe. One of my favorite assignments in the office, I got to go undercover with a group of officers for 18 months. We did a reverse copper sting. We set up a fencing operation near the San Jose airport. We called it Operation Meltdown. It was a partnership between San Jose Police Department and the Santa Clara Police Department. We ended up arresting 474 individuals in 2.5 days. We got the first cell phone bombs after 9/11. We got 7 bombs. We got a whole gun ring running fully automatic weapons, including sniper rifles, down to LA gangs. We got brand new cars. We got everything that you can think of from a recycling fencing operation. So that's one of the things I do talk about in the class. How to operate as an undercover, how to avoid the pitfalls of entrapment, things of that nature. Not one of those cases went to trial. Everyone pled. The officers, that team did an excellent job in the cases. So it was, we had everybody on video, which helped too. Don't get me wrong. The whole setup and the process and finding the location, and then knowing the limits of what we can and cannot do as law enforcement when it comes to undercover operations. I was really lucky in my career, retired. Now I do part-time legal work, and that's where I am now.
That's awesome. That was a lot of, that's pretty impressive. And I'm just thinking back to my coworkers at Santa Clara PD. I know some of those guys that you were talking about. We'll talk offline because I don't want to say any names.
Let's just say a good time was had by all, and we'll just leave it there.
Well, tell us about your victim and witness and case preparation testimony class.
Yeah. So one of the most important things is in trial prep is prepping your witnesses, prepping your victims, prepping your officers. A lot of times officers come to court and either they're not prepared, they haven't spoken to the DA. Witnesses come to court in the same way. And one of the things we have to recognize in that prep is that everything begins at the beginning when you first contact that witness, especially now that everything is being recorded with body cams. We come in with our own preconceived notions about every call that we respond to. If it's a DV call, a 245 call, a drunk driving, you already kind of running through your mind what to expect. And that may be reasonable and it may be accurate. But the other side is that sometimes it's not accurate and sometimes it's not reasonable. So we have to recognize our own biases. On DV calls, you may have been called out to a particular residence 3 or 4 times in the last month. Now you're going out for the 4th or 5th time. It's like, oh my God, we're going to be there again. You don't know exactly where you're going to be stepping into each and every time. So you have to be aware of your biases going forward and know that many times, especially victims of DV or sexual assault that we come across, don't necessarily tell everything up front. There's a lot of familial factors, embarrassment, the nature of the crime that affect a witness's ability to feel comfortable with the officer, to tell a complete story, and they may not. Many of these cases are delayed reporting, which means that they may be talking about something that happened years ago. For example, in my USA swimming case, we had the defendant, Andy King, who was a swim coach in San Jose. And he was a highly regarded coach. He had coached Olympic athletes. He had been coaching for over 30 years up and down the West Coast, from Seattle all the way down to Los Angeles. And on this one particular occasion, he was molesting a swimmer. And it started out with a grooming activity. Hand over her shoulder, bringing her in closer, complimenting her, giving her flowers. Now, Andy was in his early 50s, and this is a 14-year-old swimmer. And what he was also doing was grooming everyone around him, the parents, the other coaches. So when he would hug swimmers, bring them in closer, people thought, oh, that's just Andy. He's being affectionate. Right. But he was also singling out certain swimmers. And unfortunately, with this particular swimmer, he began to groom her and took her into a shed and then fondled her breast by kind of taking down her swimsuit. Wow. She didn't immediately report. So this happened over a couple months. Finally, she told a minister in her church, who fortunately called the police. So at that point in time, we have one victim charged with 288C, 3 counts. His maximum is 4 years, 4 months. But Andy had been coaching for 30 years. And unfortunately, I had a really good team, and we went back 30 years. Wow. We found 8 victims who were willing to come forward. And it took a lot of digging. There are other police agencies that failed to do what was required of them because he'd been reported before to at least 2 other police agencies, one in California and one in Washington. Wow. And That took a lot of investigative work. It took a lot of coaxing with the witnesses to come forward, because these people were heavily involved in the USA Swim community.
Oh, yeah.
And they knew that if they went public, they were going to be outed. They were going to suffer the consequences of coming forward and putting down an Olympic sport and bringing negative attention. And then, these people, these women had not told their families. They had not told their husbands. Some of them have been through multiple marriages and divorces because of the trauma that they had at the hands of Andy King. And so learning to work with that type of situation where you have witnesses and victims, and the witnesses were the parents, who can nail down the dates for us, because, okay, it happened when I was 14 at this swim center. Well, then we have to go to the parents and get a time frame to prosecute because of statute of limitations. And, dealing with parents who have a tremendous amount of guilt that they didn't see and protect their child, dealing with the victims themselves and delayed disclosure and being outed, and people talking about them on Facebook. Oh my God, did you hear about Jane Doe? Andy was a great coach. I can't believe, she's just after money. Whatever they were saying, it was all over the internet because it made national news. Andy pled to 42 years in prison. The case did not go to trial. And that was primarily because the officers understood the sensitive nature of the case. They did a tremendous job in investigating the case. And they were really good at getting all the facts out of the victims, even through multiple interviews, and the witnesses, and establishing timeframes. And so we took a 4-month case, and he was never going to get the maximum. Maybe he'd get 2 years in prison with Jane Doe by herself, the 14-year-old.
Wow.
But when all these victims came forward, 42 years. He pled the 42 years. I could have charged him with more had he gone to trial. So Andy King is a predator that will never get out. And it's just one example of what you may come across. You may come across a one-time event, but in sexual assault cases, especially with children, and I talk about this a lot in my class, because a lot of times, because of shortages in law enforcement, patrol officers are tasked with dealing with these cases. Mm-hmm. Or an investigator, there may be 1 or 2 detectives, and they split up all the cases if you're a small jurisdiction. And you'll be getting these cases. And you have to understand the dynamics and how they can lead to a spider web of investigations that takes up a bunch of time. This is not even getting into the computer aspects of it and phones and how that can just spiral, sometimes out of control. I've had those cases. So what I try to do in my class is give examples, but more importantly, create a dialogue. The last thing I want to do is do all the talking. I need to have my students do the talking and participate and say, hey, I had this type of case, or what would you do in this situation? And then open it up to the class. 20, 30 minds are better than one. I always depended upon my officers to get input as to whether or not I was on the right path. A lot of my officers, got all of them, I think, of all the ones I worked with, great guys, great women, tremendous intelligence that they have in terms of their training, what they see in their own common experiences growing up. I had one really good investigative officer who went into law enforcement because she had been molested as a child. And she was fabulous with sexual assault cases. And I didn't know this until she was leaving the team. And she said, hey, you've done such a great job. And she got very emotional, but she wanted to use the tools that she developed and the resiliency in helping sexual assault victims. Mm-hmm. And having her speak to the class and some of the classes I've done, it's just been invaluable, because every officer brings to the table their life experience. Mm-hmm. They bring their law enforcement experience, but you bring your personality to court. You bring your personality to interviewing victims and witnesses. And the better you can become at becoming empathetic, but knowing where that line is between being an independent law enforcement investigator, but at the same time showing empathy and understanding, is really, it's an art form to get those victims and witnesses to open up and talk to you and trust. And if you can develop trust with your witnesses and victims, it's going to go a long way. And tangential to that, I know I've been talking for a while, is the follow-up, keeping in touch with these people, because the criminal process, they may think, hey, I reported the crime. The guy's going to plead guilty.
Right.
He's going to be arraigned and plead guilty. That does not happen. Right now, with the backup in courts, cases can take 3, 4, 5 years to get out. And at the same time, these victims have to maintain, and witnesses have to maintain their status to be ready. And for someone of a traumatic event, that could be hard. So it's talking about those issues, talking about your own biases, and trying to form a paradigm and network for each officer to improve their skills and relating to victims and witnesses.
Geez, it's hard to even know where to go after that, Ray. I mean, you just unpacked a whole load of stuff there. In looking at the course description, so we just talked about your course. It talks about mandated victim service programs, victims' bill of rights, Marcy's law. Every one of those things sounds like it's a specialty on its own. How do we, and maybe starting that process for a lot of people through this course, how do you get enough smarts into the street cop that can properly deal with those topics that are so deep? I mean, when you get into it, you throw the emotions, you throw the tactics, you throw then the legalities of mandated victim services, things that have to be done for certain people. I mean, it gets really complicated really quick. How can we unpack that a little bit in a way that the street cop can do what's right for the victim and stay out of trouble, honestly?
Right. I think one of the things is utilizing the resources that you have in front of you. And that would be experienced officers within your department. It could be classmates from the class. One of the things we have is a roster for all the classes that we put on. And when I teach sexual assault, the first thing I tell them, everyone around you is going to be an expert in this by the time we finish our 40-hour course. No one knows all the answers. Go ask. If you have a hesitancy about something or you're not sure, go ask somebody. Look at Marcy's law. Make sure you're covering it. I know it's really boring and it's dry, but there are certain things in there that can trigger an idea of you of how to approach something. There are some mandatory things you must do and letting them know their rights. There's a card for that. I try to make it interactive and say, how would you handle this situation? You got someone, you've gone to court. Mm-hmm. The person's going to plead. They call you up. Oh, I heard I'm going to plead. Well, okay. You can slough it off to the DA. I get that. But the victim is calling you because you're the primary point of contact. You're the first person to take the report. They trust you. They may be through 3 or 4 DAs. Who knows? The DA may not be that attentive to their needs. And they're going to ask you. And you got to know in Marcy's law that they have input into the probation department. They must be consulted before any plea deal is done by the DA in sexual assault cases. So those are the rights that they have. And as an officer, I say, hey, look, you know what? You can call the probation officer. And, or you can go the extra yard and say, hey, I can put them on a conference call. We can set up a time. Yeah. You can make the input into probation. You can make the input into the DA. Or, hey, I will let the DA know to contact you. And so, we all get busy in our lives. And one of my things is being a supervisor in the DA's office. I wanted my attorneys to return calls to their officers and to their victims. That was my priority. Victims first, then officers, then witnesses, because that's you have to triage at some point because of time factors. But letting victims know they have input into the system and that the system is going to take a long time. And there are these requirements and laws that everyone has to follow, including DAs and officers, when providing Marcy law information to our victims. So it's important to know that little piece, but going to extra yards sometimes means, hey, we'll do a conference call, because victims are reluctant. They don't know the system as well as we do. And easing that apprehension is really big to making the process work for them.
Yeah, that's really huge, and I'm glad you went there, because that's where my brain was going. Was, dial the phone, put a conference call together, and this person is going to be very reluctant to call. They think hi mucky muck, and you're a high powered lawyer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but they're there for you. So don't be afraid to get in the process.
Yeah, the system is really amorphous. I mean, it's I've had to testify in cases.
Wow.
I've been a victim of a 245 gang beating. And so, when I got called to that prelim in Santa Cruz County, yeah, I was nervous, and I know the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm like, the DA didn't give me the report. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to tell him what to do. Just let's go and we'll do it. And so I'm sitting there. Unfortunately, the three individuals pled guilty. But even for me in the system, knowing what's coming, sitting there and then having to look at these three gangsters and identify them, and it's nerve wracking. It really is. And for someone who's not in the system to come in and point the finger at someone, that's a really difficult task. Officers, we do it all. You guys do it all the time. That's the defendant who I stopped in the car. That's the guy I saw running down the street. Yeah, he changed, whatever it is. You're the professional witnesses. Before those victims and witnesses coming in, it is a shock to the system. And if you've never had to do it as a civilian coming in, it's tough. And then you have all these fears of retribution. If I testify and I say something, who's going to protect me when I leave this courtroom?
Right.
And the reality is that there's really very little protections. But I assure my victims and witnesses, in all the cases I've handled, thousands, that's only happened one or two times.
Wow. I'm sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to jump in like that.
Go ahead.
I'm having a little bit of a PTSD from my San Francisco PD days, where I was working the Tenderloin station, and we got a call on, back then it was called prostitution. Today it's human trafficking. And she was a known, human trafficked victim. And I'm up there, and she's telling us how she's been 261. And we're like, my bias is kicked in. And I was like, how can it be 261? I didn't. And then she kept on repeating the story. And then she looked at me. She goes, it really happened. Then she started crying, and she goes, you need to believe me. And so I got over those biases. We pulled a case number. We did the whole 261 investigation. You know what? We found out that there was a serial 261 punk going around doing that to our girls walking in the streets.
Yeah.
So, and those feelings will last forever. I think, like your class will help maybe bring closure to some of the cops that had a similar experience to me, and saying, need to make changes on how you see. And then, with today's training on human trafficking, that's all changed as well now, right? We see human trafficking, prostitution as more of a victim than they are a suspect. So,
right.
It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's when I look back at some of my cases, I think about how did this child end up where they are with us today? Everyone starts off as kids wanting to be loved. We don't get to pick our parents. We don't get to pick the environment, the neighborhood we're born into. Fortunately, I had a good neighborhood. I had good parents. But our victims and witnesses before us bring everything that's happened into their lives with them. And so on your case, that prostitution case, how did she end up on the street?
Yeah.
How is she there making a living, selling her body, and then she gets raped? Yeah. And she still has all those feelings and all those traumas that go along with that. And on top of that, kind of for her to come forward and tell her story and cry and say, you need to believe me.
Yeah.
This really happened. I
Yeah.
know who I am. I know I walk the streets. I know I probably do drugs and all this bad stuff, but I still have the dignity of my own body. And we need, as law enforcement, we look at people, our victims, our witnesses, even defendants, with some sort of understanding of that. They all start off as kids, and how they got there um, forms everything around them. And knowing that, and sometimes getting out those facts can help our victims and witnesses get services. I mean, I don't know what happened in your particular case, but one of the things I did with my kids, my victims who are molested by children, or who were molested as children, I would get them services at school, because special ed emotional disturbance qualifies them for special needs. They could get an IEP, a 504. They could get free counseling at the school.
Wow.
And so for a parent who's working 2 jobs or whatever the case may be, to take time off of work to get them to a therapist, that could take 3 or 4 hours out of their day. The kids at school, the school must provide these services. And it was, in some ways, a very convenient way to help some of these victims, especially children, get help. And at the same time, partnering with some CBOs, community-based organizations, to get the family some of the services they need. And so that was one of the things I tried to do in my cases, where I knew the family had limited means, tough background with the family, is to use other resources that were available and mandatory that they had to produce. And it's different when, frankly, a DA sits down with the family and talks to the school. Things happen. Getting your school resource officers in the school, hey, letting them know, hey, little Ray was assaulted very badly by a coach. He's in your school. Hey, just a heads up, keep an eye on him. Let the counselor at school know. Maybe, the counselor could talk to the family about a 504. Just those little things. You never know where it's going to land. I've been relatively successful doing that with some of my victims, or those services that are in-house, where the kid is going to be there 6 to 8 hours a day, can be really helpful. There are DV services we could talk about. Getting a safe place for our victims, getting a safe place for that prostitute to show, maybe she could turn her life around. You just never know where your little small intervention is going to turn someone's life around.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention why this is impacting me, because I wasn't the detective. I was the patrol guy that took the case. It's a different mindset, and so this class of yours is going to help shape that mindset. And then second to that, this conference has several interview interrogation blocks. One is current science-based interviewing. There's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police flying down to do their version of investigative interviewing. And the common twist to all that, Ray, is a model where the investigator could be the officer, could be the full-blown detective, tries to get a voluntary, complete, and accurate statement. And now that I'm hearing all this, you play a pivotal role with this aspect into investigations. So anyway, sorry, Jeff, I just went off on.
That's all right. You got anything to say, Jeff?
No,
for us?
No, I'm not in charge. Sorry. But Dom does trigger on something else, which is actually a question on our list. So, being reserve officers, it's a unique relationship in law enforcement, right? We are sworn law enforcement officers. We just don't do it every day. And so, one of the things that we've always been taught, or at least I was always taught, is, make sure that there's someone else that can testify to anything you saw.
Mm.
so that, you're not the one that has to go to court and someone else can always testify. I was always curious, at the DA's office, does that strategy actually make any sense, or are you
No.
always going to go back to the first person, the first, I'm sure there's a term of art for it, but the first person that saw or touched?
I'm going to go with the person that's going to put in the evidence the best. To be frank, I mean, some officers are better at testifying than others.
Yeah.
Some officers are better at investigation than others. So people witnessing the same event, there's a jury instruction on this, may view things differently.
Yeah.
And I think from my point of view, at least when I was doing my cases, I had a pretty good idea of the abilities of my officers. I would watch, I would listen, I would see how, in my mind, they were going to come across to a jury. And based upon how they're going to come across to a jury, depends where I'm going to put them in my case. If they're really good, they're at the end. I want the jury, the last thing they hear is that really good testimony, either from witnesses, civilian witnesses, or law enforcement, to wrap it all up. If someone's not very good, I'm going to put them in the middle, where I'll get out what I need, but at the same time, I'm kind of hiding them, right? Or if it's really like in your situation with the prostitute, where she began crying, I'm going to lead with you, because I want the jury to have that emotion up front.
Yeah.
Something to grab them, to hold their attention. Like, oh my God, she was crying, you need to believe me. And getting out, one of the things I do in my trial testimony is getting out the emotion. Words are one thing. How words are said, the environment, the way it is used with emotion is huge. And so getting that emotion out at the very beginning of the trial for me is very, very important. I want to set the stage. I want to hold that audience, my jury. And I can only do that with officers who convey not just the words, but everything behind it. The emotion, what was going on. When you said, okay, she was crying. How was she crying? I mean, there's a tear running down your eye. Is it sobbing?
Yeah.
Is it, oh my God, you need to believe me? It's, is she screaming? Can you say it as loud as you heard it that day? You need to believe me. This really happened. Versus, you need to really, she said, you need to believe me. She then said, this really happened.
Yeah. Interesting question is, we're often taught writing reports, just the facts, right? Dragnet probably did us all wrong, just the facts, ma'am. How much room is there in a police report for emotion?
So that is, your police report is an aid to memory. It is not a verbatim. It is hearsay. It cannot come in the court. What that's going to do is trigger your memory of that day. And just, Dom, in your situation, years later, you still remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You still remember that emotion. You saw it. Now, we all have body cams now for the most part. I get that. But at the same time, in order to play that body cam, I still have to lay a foundation. I still have to lay that foundation for the officer. You took the interview? Yes. Is this a video? Yes. You saw that emotion on the video. Yes, I did. Did it stop after you turned off the camera? No, it continued. She was really shaken up about having to come forward. Yes, she's a prostitute. Yes, she knows no one's going to believe her. That's her belief. But it's not our job to disbelieve or believe our witness, so to speak. Our job is to investigate and find out what happened. And if that led to the victim being believed, great. If that led to the victim being inaccurate and wrong and lying, that's great too. But at the same time, we have to follow a process. But that process doesn't make us devoid of human emotions. We're going to see some horrible stuff as law enforcement. And we cannot be expected just be robots. I've had police officers cry on the stand, talking about events, knocking on the door and letting someone know that their loved one is dead, and hearing the screams of a mother of realizing that their child's lying dead in the street. That's traumatic for everyone.
Mhm.
And if an officer were to show emotion appropriately, that's fine. We're all human. We, even in our report writing, yeah, you write down the facts and everything else, but it should be an aid to memory where if it does trigger the emotion behind the event, that's fine. As a DA, my job is to paint a picture. My job is to paint everything that occurred that day.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks, Ray, for for providing that information. I really hope that people watching this interview entices them to sign up for your class, because your class already has a huge interest, and I just want you to know that. But Jeff, do you have any other follow-up questions? Otherwise, I'm going to.
No, and I apologize. I had a computer glitch there, and I got kicked out for a second. Ray, I want to be respectful of your time, but thank you so much for sitting
Sure.
with us. The whole purpose here is to give the people that might be interested in taking your class, an introduction, a snippet, and get them interested. And I am definitely interested.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, me too.
Don, our puck needs to be like 10 days so that everyone can attend everything, because everyone we talk to is just absolutely fascinating.
I know every instructor. These are high flyers, man. These aren't.
It's hard, but that's why the best resource for these officers are the officers around them.
Yeah.
The guy's been on the force 15, 20 years. The senior people have kind of seen it all, that can share their experience and information.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well,
Ray, thanks so much.
Yeah. So,
all right, guys.
Ray, do you have any other parting words?
It's an honor to be selected to teach. It really is. It keeps me involved, and to think that I could help officers do a better job, and at the same time feel some gratitude from the public that we really respect what you do. It's a thankless job. It's a very difficult job. And to be a part of supporting law enforcement, teaching and talking with people is a real privilege. So I thank you all for the opportunity.
Thanks. And for those aiming to advance their careers and create a meaningful impact in law enforcement, Ray's wealth of experience and his classes are invaluable. With that, we extend a warm invitation to all law enforcement professionals and enthusiasts to join us at the upcoming RPOC conference, featuring high-end training classes and instructors such as Ray at the Marriott Los Angeles Burbank Airport Hotel, right across from the Bob Hope Airport. Lastly, our thoughtfully selected courses offer practical insights that will transform your approach to law enforcement duties. So seize this opportunity to boost your skills, network with peers, and help shape the future of law enforcement. So when you guys get a chance, there's the ticker down below so that you can register for this year's conference. And Ray, thanks again for your contribution. Take care.
Take care, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.